Good evening, and thank you for joining us on our latest Facebook Live, which will focus on the issue of firearms licensing in West Mercia. My name is John Campion, and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
I'm Callie Bradley, I'm the Chief Inspector, and I am the Senior Delegated Authority for Firearms Licensing.
And good evening, I'm Marc Bayliss, I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
So really grateful for people tuning in to listen to our discussion around firearms licensing, a really technical, bespoke bit of policing, and yet has quite an impact on our communities, or some parts of our communities across West Mercia. Earlier in this year, I held a community conversation down in Hereford with Callie and colleagues around this issue, and some members of the community were present and indeed were able to hear some of the questions and answers being put, but we recognise that the firearms community is much wider than maybe we're able to be there, and we wanted to run this community conversation based on this subject to help get some information out there to the community, but also to update the community on the work that is being done to potentially address some of those issues. West Mercia is a beautiful area where we have some amazing countryside to which licensed firearms are an important part of not only the economy but also potentially the way of life. But at the same time, a firearm is exactly what it's described to be. It is a very serious implement that causes a huge amount of harm when used incorrectly. So it's vital that we've got an absolutely robust system of firearms licensing in West Mercia to make sure those that have the licensed firearms can access them, and those that shouldn't have them, we have a good system in place to make sure that they don't get access to them. We want our community absolutely to be safe, and this is an important part of achieving that. I've done some work with the force over a period of time, making additional resources available, but also working with the Chief Constable to make sure that the issue of licensing firearm is understood and any challenges identified and processes put in place to how we manage, mitigate and ultimately overcome them. And some of the questions today hopefully will draw out some of that work that the force has been doing. So we asked for questions in advance, to which we've had a lot of engagement from the public, to which we will attempt to go through some of them this evening, and we will hopefully touch on all of the areas that the public have identified, and whilst we might not explicitly answer everybody's question, hopefully the themes within the questions will get addressed. But also, if there are questions from those watching live, if you put them into the comments beneath, we will also be able to have a look at those at the end. So we've had roughly about 100 pieces of correspondence in my office since the beginning of last year, and a lot of the issues raised are around the timeliness of the process, and I think that will be in tonight's discussion. But we should also recognise some of the significant events that have happened in that period, not least of which an incredibly difficult and impactful incident where a licensed firearm was used to cause a huge amount of harm down in Plymouth. So it's right that following that there has been a huge examination of not only the laws around licensing, but also how police process those licensing conditions. And it's really important to make sure that we understand the impact of that, and that's why it's probably a really good time, Callie, to start with yourself to give a bit more of a context to those that are listening at home around some of those changes and challenges that you and your department face in dealing with this issue.
Yes, thank you, John. As you rightly point out, there was a serious incident in 2021 in Plymouth, which led to a full review by the coroner in relation to the firearms licensing that Devon and Cornwall had set up at the time. From that, there were a number of recommendations, and that has fed into quite a lot of changes in terms of national guidance, legislation. We've had new statutory guidance that's come out that provides us with a really robust tool in which to apply our decision making for licensing decisions. We've also had the College of Policing have also delivered in August approved professional practice, which tells all police forces on how they should operate within this framework. We're still waiting for an update on the licence fees. That's being reviewed, and I know that a number of members of the community have been asked to contribute to a national survey on that. So that is currently sitting with the Home Office, and we were expecting an update in November, but I think that's been pushed back now till January. So we're hoping for some information on that as well. So the new statutory guidance specifically requires police to do a whole lot more now. There are a number of checks that we, under guidance, have to carry out for every licensing application and every renewal. We have 33,000 licences in West Mercia, which is second only to Devon and Cornwall by a few hundred. But what we have also on top of that is we have a considerable number of registered firearms dealers, we have military installations, we have manufacturers within the West Mercia area, we have a lot of clubs, and so we also have, on top of those 33,000 licences, we also have additional work that probably makes up for about 40% of the work that firearms licensing do as well. So with the introduction of the statutory guidance, the checks that we now have to carry out on individuals, on their background, on their circumstances, on their medical situation, there is a lot more that we have to put into that. And at the moment we're really struggling because we only have the same resources as we had a year and 2 years ago. So to be able to implement the statutory guidance and ensure we are focusing on public safety and have timeliness has been a really tricky balance that we've had to try and work through. So in terms of the additional work that we have also is that the coroner specifically asked all police forces to review all firearms returns for the last 5 years. That produced over 2,000 cases in West Mercia where we had over the last 5 years returned firearms that had been either handed to us or we had seized. So we had to review all 2,000 cases. Any of those returns that were considered to be of a higher risk, we've had an added layer of scrutiny with an inspector having a look at 197 cases, which we finished yesterday in time for the deadline with the coroner. So that has gone back in to the central group. One of the things that we have recognised, and obviously with the 200,000 contribution you made for us to really kind of push the work that the Firearms Licensing Unit were doing, we are in the process of recruiting 3 FEOs. We've identified 3. They're going through the vetting process at the moment, so that's 3 additional. We also have recruited some extra admin staff, and we are in the recruitment process for some more. We've had a few bumps along the way, but those are in train.
So really that additional capacity, the extra 200,000 that I've provided, majority focused on staff as in additional bodies to do it, and indeed we'll be announcing in the coming days we've also provided a further 5 vehicles, funding for 5 vehicles for them to do their stuff. Why is that important in places like West Mercia? Why is what's the additional vehicles? How will that help on some of these challenges?
Well, as you know, West Mercia is a very rural area. Some of our licence holders are up farm tracks across land that is quite difficult to get to, and currently we are having to use hire cars, which are generally small road cars. So with your support, we have purchased 5 vehicles that are capable of going off-road. They're currently being fitted up with some gun cases in the back so that we can transport safely, and they should be rolled out to 5 of our FEOs over the coming weeks, I should think, which is really important. Really
driving the improvements that we want to see in this section.
Yes, indeed.
Sorry, Callie, you might have said it, but FEOs, just for anybody who's not aware of
Firearms Inquiry Officers. So those are the individuals who will come out to see you when you apply for a grant. They will come out to interview you. They will come to look at the land that you're going to be shooting on in certain circumstances. They will check the security within the house, and they will also do an interview with you and potentially with your family members if it's deemed necessary. So we currently only have 9 firearms inquiry officers across the West Mercia area, and obviously with the volume of work that we have to do, that just wasn't keeping up with the demand. So the extra 3 will certainly help once they're trained and out and about. We also have, as you are aware, put in a bid for an expansion of the department, and that is currently with chief officers. It has been in principle signed off and agreed that we will have a significant increase into our resources in the next financial year. That will see a number of support staff working behind the scenes, processing the applications, doing all the calls, checks and everything before they send it out to a firearms inquiry officer, but also an additional support structure of police officers. So we will see some more investigators join our team, some DCs that have intelligence backgrounds, doing those checks that are required as part of the statutory guidance.
So so not only some change in the short term, but also some prospect of some further investment coming down the line. Really grateful to hear, Callie, and thank you for setting that out. But I was going to move across now to some of the questions that we've had submitted, if we can. And obviously they do tend to form into groups, as it were. So I know you've seen sight of them, but I was going to I'll read them out just so that the public can understand the questions that we're alluding to. But a huge number of them, of course, were in relation to the process, around the time to process, but also the current picture on the checks that the applicants would receive, would go through to achieve the approval. John from a shooting club here in Worcester said that they have the right to possess a firearm. Why should we be paying a licence fee at all? So we pay a current level of fee. There's a proposal potentially to increase that, we're hoping. Even if the increased fee, how close do you think the fees come to covering the cost of administering the licence?
I think there's 2 questions in there. Firstly, your question, nowhere near is the answer. So the price that a person pays for both a certificate and a renewal certificate do not in the slightest way cover the work that has to be done.
Half?
Not
quarter?
even half, probably less than a quarter.
Less than
a
quarter. And the rest of it being borne by the taxpayers?
The rest of it is borne by the police, by yourself, and that's why the requirement has gone back to the Home Office to increase the licence fee. Okay. The other part of that question is that it says that the club have said we have a right to possess firearms. We don't have a right to possess firearms. No one has a right to possess firearms. You can apply for a firearm and you can be assessed to own a firearm, and only those that are deemed to be safe will be given a certificate.
I'm being generous to the person who put the question in, John in Worcester, because it's a bit like a car license, isn't it? If you are seen to meet a certain standard, then you are, and I think the question is predicated on if you meet the standard, then the system should result in. We're not quite in American, Fifth Amendment rights or whatever the amendment is.
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment. Fifth Amendment is when you don't have to incriminate yourself.
That's right.
That's where I'm getting confused around. The other one.
We've got that one though.
The next question was around the time to process. Mike said it would be good to know from the police what they believe to be a realistic, achievable target for granting and renewing shotgun and firearms licensing. So there's no national standards for these, are there?
Absolutely not.
And what do you think is a reasonable? I know I might have a different view as Commissioner, but what do you think as a professional officer responsible currently for delivering it? What would you think is a reasonable period?
It is a really good question, and we have to take us back a couple of years to the time during COVID. Before COVID, we were able to process grants fairly promptly. However, during
what would you call fairly promptly?
I would say within 12 months for a firearms and within 6 months for a shotgun. However, during COVID, with staff being limited to be able to get in and do those things, the backlog started to creep up. We didn't close our doors to new grants coming in, and so we have had a continuous application backlog that we've not been able to then keep up with. So we are now in a situation where our backlogs are such that we are literally trying to keep on top of things with the resources that we currently have.
Okay.
Might be helpful, Callie. What's the period of time at the moment, so that if anybody is listening and has got an application in for a grant, what is it currently working at?
So we're currently focusing on shotguns. That is purely because the new staff that we've recruited, there is less processing that has to go into a shotgun grant because there are less legislative requirements around shotguns than there are around firearms. So putting a shotgun grant through, we currently have a couple of members of staff who are focusing on shotgun grants. So we've really been able to drive that backlog down. And so it was going from about a year a few months ago. We've now got it down to 8 months. So it would be an 8-month wait for shotgun. Firearms, unfortunately at the moment, we can only process firearms grants when our renewals has kind of reduced, and our renewals are significantly high at the moment. So our firearms grants are having to wait a lot longer, which at the moment stands at about 20 months.
Okay. One of the questions that we've had in from Mike was around what is the quickest a shotgun grant has been done in the past 6 months?
8 months.
So that would be the fastest it would have come through.
Yeah.
One of the other questions as we're just talking about shotguns is around Jonathan asked what the date for shotgun grants are the licensing team up to, i.e. how far back is that the same? Is it about 8 months?
Yeah, we are in March at the moment, so that's why it's
Okay.
about an 8-month wait.
Okay.
And I noticed the next question is in relation to how long beforehand should you put a renewal in,
Yeah.
which is 12 weeks before expiry. Don't put it in before that. Put it in at 12 weeks, and then we will contact you if we need any further information from that.
One of the other questions is, it's been 11 months since I applied for a shotgun grant. My application is straightforward. No criminal convictions, low crime area, genuine reason for use. How come this process is so protracted? Other police forces can process in 2 to 3 months. Why can't simple applications like mine be fast-tracked? Is there a triage in terms of the complexities of the cases, or do we literally just work through the...
We literally work off the oldest first. That's the fairest way to do it.
Yeah.
Everyone gets the same level of checks, whether you're a upstanding member of the community or whether you've got a bit of a hidden past. Everyone gets the same level of checks. That's what the statutory guidance sets out for us. In relation to what other departments can do, it will very much depend on how many licenses they've got to manage, how many renewals are coming in at any one time. So for somewhere like the West Midlands area, they have a very small firearms licensing responsibility because there are less people within the West Midlands area that carry a firearm than in our rural area. So it's all very much dependent on which force you go to and how big their firearms licensing team is.
Can we talk about the gun market? Okay. So one of the questions that we've had said from John, who said that people are delaying being granted a certificate. They are unable to buy their first gun, which results in depressed second-hand market that they're seeing at the moment, according to John. It'd be interesting to know how many guns are now in storage because of the delays. So, in effect, for those that might not fully understand it, you can't hold a firearm unless you have a license for it, but a licensed dealer can hold your gun for you, or indeed somebody else who has a license, as long as it's within the... So, what's the force's view around the potential suppression of that second-hand market, and why are there delays in granting that certificate for their first gun?
So you can't get a gun until you have a certificate. So if he's referring to having to lodge guns, that would generally be if your certificate has expired and you haven't applied for a renewal. And just to give you a figure, we have on average 80
Lodged guns?
No, we have about 80 people at any one time who have not renewed their certificate in time, and therefore we have to then contact them to tell them to lodge their guns because they failed to put in a renewal on time at the 12-week period. They also get a reminder, so we send letters out as a reminder that they have to renew their certificate. If people put their renewal in, we generally will give them an extension. If we're not able to issue the certificate in time for the expiry date, we will issue an automatic extension of 8 weeks, in which it gives us time to process that and get an FEO out if it's required. But there are individuals who don't renew in time, or who think that it's okay to renew 2 days before their certificate expires, and unfortunately we can't process them quickly, so we ask them to lodge their guns.
So in terms of the delay getting their first gun is the issue that we were just talking about before, about the length of time. But in relation to the numbers that are lodged, it predominantly, because the commitment is that if they apply in time that you will process the renewal, and it tends to be around those that haven't given enough time for the section to be able to process, and that roughly sits at about 80 individuals most of the
at any one time. We have it's usually between about 3 and 10 every day who expire, who haven't submitted their applications. We're now trying to get ahead of that and contact them several weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance, to say, you haven't submitted your renewal, you need to submit that, or you need to lodge. So we're trying to get ahead of that curve, but of course that's additional work on the licensing team who are trying to process all of the renewals. So it's kind of a vicious circle, really.
So tonight, we've been talking a bit about some of the stats and other bits and pieces, and the next area of questions around transparency and about what information is out there in terms of the consumer citizen knowing the performance of the local department, but also managing expectations as well, doesn't it, in terms of understanding that performance. Can you publish monthly figures against an agreed graph covering 2 years of the catch-up phase and then a 2-year rolling graph after that to show the progress? I don't know whether...
I would love to have the staff to be able to do that additional work, but unfortunately all of my staff are committed with the renewals and the grants.
So in effect, we do have some of the management data that we collect as a force, because it's been provided to me, and we've got it. So in terms of, I haven't looked on the force's website to see what we do publish. Just give me an idea. Do you know what roughly we
don't publish?
We don't publish any performance information, and that's the other bit, isn't it? As we talk to the public out there, we have finite resources, and it's how we choose as to how we direct those resources. It's an interesting element around information is empowerment, isn't it? And I think it is an area that perhaps my office, working with the force, we might look to see how we can support getting some more of that information out there.
Perhaps we could put it on your website.
We could. It's still the same information, isn't it? Though it's how we get it in the first place, because a lot of our systems aren't always automated in terms of they have to be manually extracted. Going to go on to talk about mental health and medical. So John asks, how long are the medical pro formas submitted alongside the applications valid for, i.e. all applications going to be invalid if they haven't been actioned by the team within 6 months because of the medical information is outdated. Is this an issue that we're seeing?
Yeah, it is a really good question actually, because the legislation specifically says that it has to be within 6 months. So John raises a really valid point in relation to this. So the process that we're undertaking at the moment is that we will go on the information that we have from the GP, and that at the point that they get a visit from the Firearms inquiry officer, they will ask additional questions in relation to their medical health, their mental health, in order to supplement the GP's information that we've received. If at any point we feel there is a requirement to speak to the GP again, that is a cost borne by us. We will then contact the GP for more information and wait for that to come through before a decision is made.
So the 6-month element is a real challenge, and indeed,
It is.
It's and indeed, I don't think the health sector is necessarily as always responsive either in terms of getting that information back, which must make the challenge doubly so. You touched on a little bit, Callie, before as we were starting about capacity within the unit in terms of some interim investment that I've made on behalf of the public, but also some potential planned further investment. Looking at capacity, Mike said through the time of his application, I've learned that the sticking point causing the delay is the office staff, not the FEOs, Firearms Inquiry Officers, to process the paperwork. And I'd like to know what's being done to resolve this. So I think that alludes to your proposal that you were talking about earlier, going through about how some greater capacity to make the machinery work, ultimately, of staff supporting that process.
Right. However, Mike is kind of half right. We do have a bottleneck. We do have a backlog with our FEOs. There are several hundred of tasks that are sitting with FEOs as well. So it's not just the office staff, it's the demands that we're also putting on our FEOs because they have such a wide-ranging job in order to do what I said, the 40%, which is the RFDs, the other things that they have to do alongside this. So it's both. We need resourcing in both.
The same questioner also mentions around what is being done to bolster the supervisory staff to be able to ensure that I think the decisions being made are being processed so that more can be processed as in the actual decisions one way or the other.
Within the paper that's been submitted to the chief officers, that also includes a number of supervisory posts and manager posts that will free up the decision making to more people.
So Ron said, who is a firearms holder, why don't you make it a 10 years licence and bring in an independent body to help get the licences through faster? So what are the options there in terms of the length of licence that can be issued, and can the work be outsourced? Can we bring in, I don't know, a neighbouring force or a private company to help with the work? What's the regulations behind all those kinds of things?
So it's set in legislation that renewal has to be done every 5 years, and that's also within the new statutory guidance. I don't think that's going to change. As much as there are people out there who have held firearms and shotguns for many, many years with absolutely no issues, it could just be that one occasion where something goes wrong that we have to know about it and we have to assess against what happens in those 5 years. If we went for longer, we might miss something in that 10 years.
So in relation to the outsourcing, my understanding is it's the Chief Constable who's responsible for the system and indeed is then held accountable in law around the decisions that are made, and the system is for each of the policing areas to determine, and virtually every police force has exactly the same arrangement that we have in West Mercia. Is that your understanding as to how it works elsewhere? So
we, all forces are part of a national group called the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Working Group. All those kind of ideas would get fed into that group. I'm not actually aware of any private companies that are currently offering that service. Otherwise we would have heard about it through the national working group. But of course, everything like that comes at a cost, doesn't it? And the cost really needs to be invested, that budget needs to be invested in our own resources to make sure we can do it within. And then there are safeguards in place because it's the chief that delegates the authorities to issue licences to police officers at the moment. I don't think that's going to change in legislation either.
And also linking back to a point that you made earlier around the fee that's paid by those applying doesn't cover the whole cost at the moment. So it's how then we would manage the ability for another party to come come and do that work as well, the practical realities of it. Can we move on, if we can, to an area that's often raised with me around access to the team, very busy team doing the work that you've described. We see a number of people frustrated about trying to get in touch. When we see many delays, don't we? We then spend lots of time talking about why there's delays rather than sorting out the delays. Keith, who said he's recently moved to Shropshire and is an FAC holder.
Firearms certificate.
There we go. And I keep trying to contact the firearms team, but there's never any response. Why is that, is his question.
So due to the demand, we have to focus on the renewals to ensure that we are meeting the requirements for public safety. The renewals are our priority. Because of that, we have had to reduce the time that we can have our office staff actually speaking to the public on the phone, because every time they have to pick up the phone to somebody, they're not focusing on what the task is in hand in order to keep within the time frames. So we now have our phone lines open between 11 and 12 every day. Some days they're absolutely manic and everyone's on the phone for the whole hour. There are other times when it is a little bit quieter, probably towards the end of the week, where it is a little bit quieter. So if they are trying to get through, I would suggest they try at the end of the week between 11 and 12. And emails, unfortunately, we have hundreds of emails coming in with inquiries. If your email is about an inquiry, unfortunately, we don't have the staff to be able to respond to those inquiries. If we have contacted you, then we will be looking for your email for a return of what we're looking for. So I would generally ask that people don't contact us unless it's important, unless it's to report something, in which case, if it's a change of address that you've moved into the county, you can do that online. You can update through the firearms licensing portal online, and that can be a way through to us as well.
So the message there clearly is that there is the access through the telephone, and indeed the end of the week is quieter than the beginning of the week.
Yeah.
And indeed in terms of email inquiries, the capacity isn't there to respond to the general ones,
No.
but if it's around an inquiry that the force has made back to that applicant,
Yes.
that is what would be responded to.
And my plea would be, if you have submitted your application or your renewal, take it from us that we will get to it, and we will contact you at the point where we want to book an appointment to come out and see you, and then it will roll from there. If you're contacting us to chase where your application is in the system, that just prevents us from actually getting to those ones that we really need to get to.
This might be, Callie, where tying the themes together, whereas if we're publicly able, the force is publicly able to say how long the wait is on a more dynamic basis, then people can see that and judge for themselves, so they probably wouldn't need to contact. If they see that the wait for a shotgun is 8 months and 20 months for a firearm, and it's coming down or whatever, if they're only 18 months into a firearms wait, there'll probably less demand for that. So probably something that information, if we make more information available, it might help reduce the demand for phone calls and people trying to email in. So perhaps it is something that we should continue to look at.
Yeah, I have requested a change to our out of office through our IT system as well, to give more information to people. If they do email in, it will be an automatic reply to everybody. And I know people get fed up with automatic replies, but actually we'll have information in there as to why we're perhaps not able to get to their email as quickly as we should, and a bit more information about the time.
Yeah, because Gromit, who's been watching, does say, why is there no performance? But it says that other forces are able to provide a bit more performance in relation to the unit. And I think that kind of expectations management alone, I think, is quite helpful, because some of the stats we've talked to today about the 8 months figure, for example, that helps manage, well, actually, I don't need to worry after 2 months or 6 months, do I? Because I know that actually it will be longer than that. And I think that understanding some of the timeliness, I think, can be important. Somebody in the questioning asked around, quite explicitly, around shotgun, and their question was, their question was around importing a shotgun. How do I add a shotgun that was imported legally to my current shotgun certificate? A bit of technical, nuance within there, Callie. I don't know if that's something you'd have the answer to.
I do. So if you import a weapon, a shotgun specifically, if it's imported by yourself and you have brought it into the country, it is your responsibility to ensure that where you've bought it from, it goes onto your certificate, that you enter the country holding your certificate with that shotgun at the same time. And you then have a duty to inform us that you have now added this shotgun that's come from another country. Depending on which country, now people will have to check on this, but depending on which country you have bought it from will depend on whether it has to go to the proofing house or not. So some countries we have an agreement with because their standards are as good as ours, and as long as it comes with documentation, that might be fine. But if it's come from a country that doesn't have standards that we agree to, then it will have to go to the proofing house at Birmingham or London.
Okay.
You're impressed with that one, aren't you, John?
Yeah, I'd never heard of a proofing house either before, but...
So all weapons have to be proofed to make sure they're safe. So anything that's manufactured in this country has to go to the proofing house. Anything that kind of passes through that's going to be sold on has to have a proofing stamp on it. So that's really important.
And that would be done through manufacture normally, would it? When it's manufactured?
When it's manufactured before it's sold, it will go to a proofing house to show that it's safe.
Certified.
Yeah.
It's and indeed that's why we've got some of the highest standards in the world in relation to firearms, and indeed quite rightly so. Can I just touch on some of the reminder letters that we've referred to? Simon said that he personally found the tone of the reminder letters that get sent out particularly officious. He says there's an irony to the multiple references to timely application. You've alluded, I think, to lots of your questions as to why the timeliness is so important with the reminder. To give the unit a fighting chance to get it done in time, so it has to be brought in time. How do you manage some of our citizens' expectations in terms of there being hammered to be timely, and yet they might have that perception that West Mercia isn't able to give them a timely service in return? And why is it important that they actually see past maybe what they see as overly officious language for saying why they need to help?
I think the reminder is there, and it really helps a lot of people to prompt them. Because it's a 5-year certificate, it gives you that prompt. I mean, we all carry around a driving licence. We're not prompted by the DVLA to renew our driving licences. We're supposed to check and do it on time. But how many of us know exactly which year our driving licence expires? Unless we get it out of our pocket, we probably don't know. So we go above and beyond what we are actually legislatively required to do, and we send out a reminder. I apologise to Simon if he feels it's officious, but actually for some people it's really helpful because it's that prompt, oh, I must do that. And obviously we do need it to be timely. We want people to get them in at 16 to 12 weeks, so we've sent the reminder out early on, because then it gives us plenty of time to go back to that individual if anything is missing. And you would not believe, John, the amount of times that we do have to contact people because there might be one thing on the form that's not been signed or ticked, or something's missing, and we're so used to seeing those applications that it gives us that breadth of time to go back to them and say, you haven't put this on, and then we can rectify it and get them processed just as quickly. They don't go to the back of the queue because something's wrong. They will get processed, but we contact them to say we need something else.
What's worrying is I think I sometimes use bold words in some of the emails I send myself, so I'm probably also going to have to reflect on style. But really good to put some context as to why so important. I'm just going to start to pick up some of the bits that we've had in the comments underneath some of the broadcasts tonight, Callie, if I can. We have touched on some of the areas, but I think useful just to go through them.
I can't promise that I'll be able to answer anything without doing a bit of research, though.
No technical questions, I don't think, from what I've seen. The first one from somebody from Basque. who is the association, as you well know, but for those that might not know that are listening, and he asks, could you give an idea of when we might start to see some improvements? So you've lived and breathed this, and indeed some of the scrutiny that happens from people like me and from others. In your mind, if you get through the case that's currently just being considered by chief officers, when do you think those green shoots might start to emerge?
So we hope to recruit by April, because it has to be in the new financial year. The budget has to accommodate the uplift. So if we recruit from the 1st of April, I would probably suggest that first quarter is going to be dedicated to training, learning experiences, but we will start after that first quarter to see some real benefits to having new staff in the department.
So that's the summer next year, in
Yes.
effect, when we're seeing those green shoots. John asks, and this might be a technical question, so we'll see how it goes. You say that you must not submit an application for renewal no more than 12 weeks ahead of expiry. You say that you will get an 8-week extension, 5 months in total. You also say that renewals are currently being issued 8 months. This leaves at least 3 months gap. Please explain. I think there's some confliction there, isn't there, between new applications and renewals?
So if you submit a grant application for a new certificate, that's the one you'll have to wait 8 months for.
So the renewals?
So a renewal is if you already have a certificate, we will send you a reminder when you're coming up to your 5-year expiry. We give you roughly 3 months, 3 to 4 months, so between 12 and 16 weeks, we want you to submit your renewal papers in. And that's the one that we focus on, and we try to process. Because that's a commitment to public safety, because if they expire, then we've got a lot of catching up to do. In fact, when the coroner looked at, in his findings for Devon and Cornwall, one of the areas he picked up on was that there were a lot of Section 7 permits that were issued, which were additional permits to the automatic 8-week extension. These were permits to carry on having a certificate without having done any of the checks. We as a force have never entered into that zone, and we only ever issue a Section 7 permit in extreme circumstances. So potentially the death of a certificate holder, we might issue the partner a certificate to hold on to those guns until they can get them sold to a firearms dealer or to pass them on to someone else. So we would only issue that in extreme circumstances. So if you're submitting a renewal, it's 12 to 16 weeks beforehand that we want you to put that renewal in.
And that commitment being, if you do that, you'll get it.
You'll get it on time.
Okay.
If you submit your renewal with less time, you might get an automatic extension. We occasionally have to do automatic extensions for those that have submitted in plenty of time, if there's an inquiry that we've got to do, if we've got to send an FEO out, if that we've got to follow up on some medical, and we will automatically issue that extension.
We've had a question from Nick who linked to that says, do the renewal for a long-standing shooter with a clean record still require a visit and from an FEO, or can it be done online?
So about 30% of the FEO's work is on renewals, and that might be because you've informed us that you have a significant number of extra guns, or that you have changed the land in which you're going to shoot, or there is a variation on your certificate that you've put in for on your firearm. In those circumstances, we would do another visit to check that you've got the right security, that the land is appropriate, that you have the knowledge and understanding to vary your gun to something else.
So the next question is around, if you concentrate on shotguns and renewals, there's a chance a FAC application may never get seen. So if you have 33,000 to monitor, when are FAC applicants going to get their turn as a priority? So I think what they're in effect saying is that there's renewals would outweigh, but what we've heard tonight is actually there is a backlog around those new applicants, but there is some work through them, and the commitment being from some of the investment that will get shorter. So the reassurance, I think, not putting words in your mouth, is that they will get to the applicants, but it is just taking us longer than we would expect at the moment.
Yes, and a firearms certificate is far more complex, requires a lot more processing in the background, and requires a lot more of our FEO in terms of the inquiries we have to do. Whereas the shotgun certificates, we have a lot more of those that we have to process because they're more widely available. People want shotguns rather than firearms. Firearms is a very specific thing that we have to put a lot of work into.
So the questioner who raised a question about the imported firearm, I got a slightly further nuanced version, just saying that the information you gave around that would be quite useful on the website or indeed out there to access. His further question is, and again it might be a technical one that you might not have the answer to, can I use the shotgun if it does not appear on the certificate, and how do I know if proofing is needed or not? Where would they likely go to get that kind of information?
I know it, but I can't quite recall where they have to go to at the moment.
We have put you on the spot.
It's to do with importation, not trading standards. It's Department of Imports something.
So the Gov website, is that
yes,
likely to
that
be
might
the
help.
resource? Yeah.
That might help. If it's not on the certificate, it really should be on the certificate. It has to come with a history.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it might be something that you can't possess.
And we can, if you have got the information, we can pop it onto the chat beneath this post afterwards that the commenter will be able to have a look at. Kieran makes more of a statement, but it's interesting just to put it out there. In the name of transparency, there should be a national service standard for grants and for renewals, and forces should publish their performance against these. This way, best practice can be highlighted and poor performance better addressed. Now, I'm not going to ask you to address those explicitly, but you alluded to it earlier. We've not heard a huge amount tonight about actually the community of licensing organisations, the forces, do really collaborate and work together, don't they, in terms of best practice challenges, the different nuances of the areas that have perhaps solved a solution or indeed approved a process. So how does that work, and are West Mercia part of it?
So we feed our stats into the national group all of the time. These are then fed back to the Home Office. I think the Home Office might publish them somewhere, but I'm not entirely sure where. We work really closely with the national group, and there are always ideas bubbling or things that people are doing in different forces that we then look to adopt. One of those things being the strategic assessment that's required. So there are a couple of forces that are currently trialling a strategic assessment. Once that is completed, then we will probably model our strategic assessment against that, but we've already started some work to model where our gaps in the statutory guidance currently sit. So there's lots of work that goes on in the background that we feed through the national group so that we can learn off each other.
I think just to add to and answer Kieran's point, I think we are expecting His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary to look at firearms licensing units across the country. I do believe that's going to happen next year. Yeah, so I think there will be the sort of national scrutiny around this sort of area that hopefully will give that comparability between forces. So I think that's on the horizon anyway.
Dave in Worcestershire says, can you tell me roughly how long it will take for an FEO to contact me, as I'm informed he has been given mine, I assume, application recently for a shotgun licence grant in Worcestershire?
He should probably be in touch with you within a couple of weeks, I should think, if he's been given that. In Worcestershire, our backlogs, I would say within 2 to 4 weeks.
I was hoping that would be the one that you wouldn't know, but you've shown tonight the breadth of understanding and knowledge around a complex subject which is delivered in challenging circumstances. We've seen over 50 people tune in to watch tonight, and we will make sure that it goes not only onto our Facebook site but also onto YouTube, and a really useful, I think, repository of questions being put that I think lots of people might have, and some really great answers. One of the commenters called Peter said that he particularly enjoyed tonight's broadcast, 25-year service with other force, and indeed they also considering and having the types of challenges that face West Mercia, and he particularly highlights yourself, Callie, as knowing her specialist area of policing, really knows her stuff, and indeed you should be, I'm very grateful for your contribution tonight and helping assist the public understand some of that, and of course the work of your unit in dealing with a really important issue and something that often ends up in the headlines for the wrong reasons, but really an important part of the life here in West Mercia. I want to thank all those who have been watching at home. As I alluded to, we will be putting it onto our channels to make sure that it stays there. But you also can look at my website, West Mercia PCC. If you put that into your search engine, you will see further information about my work in this area. But also, if you have any further questions that you want me to raise, the contact details are on there. I'd like to thank you, Callie, for joining tonight and taking part.
Thank you very much. And whoever that was at the very end there, what's his number? Does he want a job? Because I've got some jobs going.
And thank you, Mark, for assisting. And we will bid you good night.